They're looking at the family as segments instead of a holistic unit. And by saying to my ex-husband, oh, well, we'll make sure you get your day in court, he's paying her, like that's what he wanted her to do. So ethically, she's totally doing everything correctly. But the bottom line is it made me angrier because I knew it was all BS. And the end result made him infinitely angrier. And so it's just so harmful to the entire structure of what we need families to be.
Welcome to the Drama-Free Divorce Podcast. I'm your host, attorney and mediator, Cary Jacobson. Each week, we bring you practical guidance, real conversations, and expert insights to help you navigate divorce with clarity, confidence, and less conflict. If you're ready for a calmer, more empowered path forward, you're in the right place. Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Cary Jacobson, attorney and mediator at Jacobson Family Law. Today, we're talking about a topic that affects so many families, yet it's rarely discussed with honesty. What actually happens when the traditional divorce system, what we refer to as litigation, makes things so much more toxic, not less, and what the alternatives are that exist to help families transition peacefully. I'm thrilled to be joined by someone who is reshaping the divorce landscape, Regina DeAngelis, who is the owner and founder of Family Transitions, Divorce Coaching, and Mediation. Regina is a former divorce attorney, though she is still an attorney and no longer practices, and she has decades of experience, but it was her own painful divorce journey that has inspired her to completely rethink how families should navigate the separation and divorce. Regina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love talking about this topic because it's just, I think it's the future and it's just really always energizing for me to have a chance to talk about it.
Absolutely. I would love to start with your incredible story, get to know you a little bit more, have our listeners understand where you came from and why you're making this transition.
Sure. No. And if anything, everyone can learn from my story that if what happened to me coming from being a divorce attorney for 14 years at that point, this is really the story of what would happen to anyone, I feel like, when they go into this process, especially if you've got the wrong attorney, if the attorney's mindset is not like collaboratively focused or resolution oriented. And so I made the painful decision to divorce in 2013, 2014, right around this time of year. And I thought, well, we just need to be in separate houses. This is not a healthy situation here. We had 3 fairly small children, the oldest one who had and has a significant medical condition that is really forcing us to be all hands on deck. And so I wrote up the settlement agreement because this is what I did for a living. Right. And I knew like our situation. And I gave it to my husband and I said, like, have an attorney look at this and we can adjust if needed. And he came back and said, I'm filing for divorce. Like, we're going to do this like the right way, quote unquote. Right. He wanted everything to go through the court. And I couldn't understand because I knew that what I had written was well within the bounds of incredibly fair after 18 months of actual litigation where like there was court appearance after court appearance. We finally get to that last session. And I'd be curious if in Maryland it's the same. So often you think you're going to have your day in court, right? And you get there and you're sitting in the hallway while the lawyers are talking to the hearing officer or the judge. And that's what was happening to us. So like we're sitting in the hallway, not speaking to each other. My lawyer comes out and says, well, the judge said 60-40 in favor of me. And that was more than I had proposed 18 months prior. And his lawyer, this is what makes me so angry. She was extremely like experienced. Like this was a lawyer who was in the courthouse all the time. She should have told him on day one when she read it, you should sign this. But instead, she said to him, oh, you want the court to look at it? And so then, of course, I took the 60-40. I wonder now in hindsight, especially with my work at Family Transitions, I might not have done that now. I might have been willing to settle for what I had offered him originally because the anger that ensued, like that caused in him, like we're still not great. Like we still are like cordial, but certainly not feeling like as friendly and open as I wanted to be.
So much of what you just shared resonates because before the practice that we have now, where we keep everything out of court, I did that traditional litigation. And so much of what you just shared is like the reality. Going to court on the day of trial and either the judge basically telling the attorneys, you need to resolve it because I don't want to hear it, or there not being a judge available. And so you're put on standby and it's going to be 6 months to a year later. And so many times where settlement was proposed early on at the very beginning and the outcome or the agreement ends up being the same, if not worse, than it started out to be.
That right there is why I created family transitions afterwards, because the divorce attorneys are not doing anybody any favors, certainly not the co-parenting relationship, by saying to their client, like they're looking at the family as segments instead of a holistic unit. And by saying to my ex-husband, oh, well, we'll make sure you get your day in court. He's paying her. Like that's what he wanted her to do. So ethically, she's totally doing everything correctly. But the bottom line is it made me angrier because I knew it was all BS. And the end result made him infinitely angrier. And so it's just so harmful to the entire structure of what we need families to be, regardless of whether or not they're in one household or two. That process is just destroying the fabric of that.
Absolutely. And I recognize that there are some scenarios where this is the process that has to happen because someone is not cooperating or isn't being reasonable. But the day in court situation, it's not what everyone thinks it's going to be. And ultimately, almost always, both parties end up not happy with the final resolution.
And I always say, like, at the end of the case, everybody hates everybody. Like the lawyers never want to speak to their client again. Like the clients never want to hear from the lawyer because every time they do, it costs them $70 or whatever. So it's just it could not be more toxic. And I don't think people realize that when they decide to separate and they think, oh, well, I guess I have to get a lawyer. Like that's the first step always.
What you mentioned earlier is also looking for an attorney that is settlement minded. Like, what is it that your intentions are? If your intention is to try to resolve it amicably, it is not go find the attorney that you keep hearing about that is the bulldog or the shark. That's not going to get the result that you're looking for.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Well, you mentioned that when you were kind of going through this process that one of your children has a serious medical condition. Can you explain a little bit more about that and how that impacted either your decision to go through with the divorce and how it kind of impacted the divorce process itself?
Well, actually, it's a cautionary tale there as well, because so many clients, our agreement that what we ended up with was actually not sufficient to handle his needs as he got older. So the cautionary tale there is so many families now are dealing with special needs children and in all different areas, neurodivergent as well as physically. And you really need to make sure that your attorneys don't forget to think about the future. Like it's one thing to come up with the child support amount now or whatever, but think about what's going to happen when that child is college age, or can that child ever live independently? What does that look like? And so our agreement doesn't say anything about any of that. So we're just trying to figure it out. But my son has Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and that is a really sad journey. If you've never heard of it, it's similar to ALS, like where it's a slow loss of function, but it strikes children, not adults. And my son is 24 now. But so we were able to maintain a pretty normal custody arrangement in his younger years up until really he graduated from high school. But then his medical needs got so complex that it's really very complicated to do that out of two houses and have help and equipment and all that stuff. But so it influenced our relationship, my husband and I, very much. And just for people to be aware of too, divorce is usually nobody's particular fault. It's nobody's to blame. It's just that everybody handles their reality differently. And my husband was handling the grief and processing that in a different way than I was. And I think we just started to really not meet each other's needs at all because of how we were handling or not handling the grief and everything that came along with that.
And it's, like you said, very common for couples who have special needs children to experience this and end up separating and divorcing, because it does take such a toll on you as parents, you as individuals, and then also on the relationship.
When he was diagnosed in 2008, they told us that 80% of couples with a special needs child will eventually divorce. And I could probably prevent that from happening if I would say to people now, like, make sure that one of you does not become the default parent for managing all of that. It's just the weight of it all. People don't estimate, and then they are not equipped to handle it properly. And that's, I think, really causes so much exhaustion, like the emotional exhaustion leads to the deterioration of the marriage.
Absolutely. And I can only imagine. So I'm sorry that you as a family have experienced that.
Yeah. He's doing great though. We're doing okay.
Awesome. But as you mentioned, it is important for couples to really think about that future, because there are so many unknowns, right? Is that child going to be able to be self-sufficient? Are they going to need governmental assistance? How is that going to play into the support that's being paid from one parent to the other? Are they going to need to live in some sort of assisted or group home?
All of those things that you just said requires calm, forward-thinking, collaborative-minded conversations with your spouse, which is super hard. Imagine trying to get through all of those details if you're going through two attorneys and it's like letter back and forth and trying to keep track of it all. So again, like the collaborative approach with a family with special needs just allows you to, number one, maintain lines of communication that you're going to need long after your lawyers have disappeared. And then also to really make sure you're brainstorming and not forgetting anything, because no one attorney or, I think, client can think of everything, especially when they're in that high stress, overwhelmed sort of situation.
Absolutely. And so we've worked with couples in that scenario going through mediation and also collaborative. And you can actually, what's lovely is bringing in other professionals who have experience in this to assist in that brainstorming and making sure that the couple has covered everything.
That's exactly right. Because I really do think you need a professional, because the families, and if any of your families are in that situation listening, they know even everything is trial and error. There's not one place. The doctor doesn't say, oh, you need to call these people or think of these things. You figure it out from talking to other parents who have been through the same thing. So one professional who's an expert in the governmental assistance and anything Medicaid related, all of that is hugely helpful.
Now that you have gone through this process yourself, you've created Family Transitions and the 21st Century Family Transitions Program. Can you explain a little bit more about that process and how it differs from other things that are out there?
Thank you so much. I love talking about it because I feel like so much of what we're doing, or any collaborative law professional, is about education and making people realize, hey, you don't need to go through the traditional divorce process if you want to be divorced. And Family Transitions was really designed for families who on purpose were saying, we do not want to leave the decisions that are going to affect the rest of our life in the hands of strangers. And we want it to feel conversational, problem solving, and non-threatening. So when clients come to us, we are helping them manage holistically. So what does a separation even look like? How are we managing the bills while we're all still even in the same house? And we'll take them step by step. So it's segmented so that they're not overwhelmed and everything's happening at once. And we don't have them file for divorce either until the end. So we tell them hey, let's see if we can do this upside down if possible. We want you to go through the program, learn a little bit about even the neuroscience of how uncomfortable it feels to break this habit of being in this relationship. We want them to understand that their biology is naturally feeling like they're on the defense all the time, and to recognize that and recognize that it's normal, because once we recognize it, then we can have them calmly step back from that and proceed more rationally. And so we're normalizing those emotions that come at the beginning of a divorce, telling them to just stick with us. We're going to walk through things one step at a time. And what we do is we build with them in a very collaborative way the terms of their full settlement agreement. So what they will ultimately need to submit to the court to be divorced.
I love that you are approaching it that way as well. That's exactly how we handle the cases in our office as far as upside down. We don't start with filing in court right away, because what we find is by doing that, it raises everyone's emotions, right? And I can't tell you how many times people see the things that are put in the pleadings, and you're basically defending against that the entire time of the negotiation.
Yes. And I suspect it's probably similar too. Like when you ultimately file for divorce, if you have your agreement worked out, that divorce petition is much more benign, and like you don't have to ask for all of these crazy things that are what put people on the defensive when they see it. And so that's why we do it that way.
Absolutely. By then, where it's just a matter of checking the boxes, it's just a procedural legal matter at that point.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that, I think, and we always, of course, tell everyone like, hey, you have this reviewed by an attorney. You have the right to have an attorney as well. But most of our clients, what we're really trying to help them achieve is at least delaying as long as possible attorney involvement, because the attorneys look at everything through a different lens, because our rules of ethics are like, you have to be responsible to that one client. And so sometimes delaying that involvement gives the clients the power to say to their attorney, like, hey, look, I know that you would be asking for X, Y, or Z, but this is really what I want to do. And that way things also stay much less expensive for the client.
Absolutely. And I say it all the time that as attorneys, especially those that are still in that traditional litigation space, you can't turn the switch on and off. For those of us who have made the switch to all non-litigation, we just view things in a different way. We're really looking at it from the perspective of the clients and the parties, and making sure that, yes, they're protected, but also that what they're looking for is really the main focus.
And their long-term prognosis, basically, too. I have a friend who I did not do their divorce, but their children are in their 30s. They just had their first grandchild's first birthday party. And the daughter, who was in her 30s, was texting the dad saying, don't worry about coming. We'll have a second party. And I was like, what is she talking about? But their divorce had been so contentious that even 15 years later, everyone's adults, this is bleeding into what their grandparents or their grandchildren's birthdays look like. And that's exactly what I think you're trying to avoid, what I'm trying to avoid. This is not just this one moment in your life. This is going to impact you forever.
100%. And it can change and evolve over time. My parents are testaments to that. They got divorced when I was 7. And for the very longest time, they were cordial, but not friendly. Within the last several years, we're now doing holidays together. It's lovely to see that it is possible.
Think about that. If we can minimize the damage in the short term and reduce, I always say, we're about reducing the trauma, reducing the overwhelm. It just leaves families, even those that need ongoing therapy to process the grief and the anger or whatever, you still are not making your situation worse by the divorce process. And so you've got a healthier foundation to move forward and rebuild.
So you've said that one of the core goals of family transitions is to guide couples with compassion and empathy for each other's fears and also their sadness. And I think that's just so powerful. How do you help couples stay focused on their shared future instead of getting stuck in that bitterness that is so common in the divorce process?
It's not always easy in the early stages, because sometimes, even with mediation, people come to mediation with kind of misconceptions about what it is. And so we try to do a really good job in terms of screening to tell people when they come in. And I think this also makes them more relaxed about the process. We say right at the beginning, we're not going to talk about why you're getting divorced. We know, and that's where I say, I've been through this. I really believe that everybody is doing the best that they can with the tools that they have. And we're all in different places in our evolutionary journey. But I really try to say to them, we need to keep you focused on the future because we can't change the past. And that grief that you're feeling, I want you to still have therapeutic support, like have your individual therapist. And then we also take what I call the Goldilocks approach. And I have to coach both clients on this. Like if usually one person is the one who's been like dreaming about this for 5 years or whatever, that person is going to be feeling like, all right, let's go. We're all in. And the other person is shell shocked. And so we say, hey, if you're pushing too fast, your spouse is going to like really resist and you're going to be more likely to end up in litigation. If the other spouse has their head in the sand and they're doing nothing, then that person is going to get super frustrated and try to get their attention by hiring a lawyer. So it really is like we can't go too fast or too slow, but in coaching them and getting them to cooperate on that, they are showing compassion for each other, themselves, and empathy for what the fears that their other spouse is feeling.
It is always that one is further along in the emotional journey because they've had time to sit with this. But I always like to share with them, we can only go so fast as the other person is really ready to.
So true. And do you find like that once the other person feels safe, like they understand, oh, they're not going to be pushing me out of the house or we're going to figure this out, then they feel safe enough to come to the table and have those conversations and things actually fall into place in a very reasonable timeline.
Absolutely. So much of the unknown, as it always is. Once there's a bit more comfort there, then they can usually proceed.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's why when people come to us, they have all these questions. They're like, does it work? And I don't want to overwhelm them, but all I can say is there's a lot of science behind this idea of like scaffolding the process, like teachers would do that. There's a lot of science behind this idea of habit breaking and habit forming and neuroplasticity. Like we need to relearn how to interact and learn to recognize that, hey, so often people say, we can't talk about anything. We fight every time we try to talk about anything. And then the mediator gets there and they hear actually something very different.
Right. Yep.
But people are programmed to like be on the defensive automatically. So we also coach them on how to like recognize that pattern and break it. And the mediator is there as a pattern interrupt to break that pattern. And so all of those things together allow them to really move forward in a much more peaceful way.
Well, I know for many couples, staying out of court just feels absolutely impossible. How does your program support people in reaching fair, comprehensive agreements without needing attorneys or the court system if they choose that route?
So this is where we get really non-traditional as well, because I think, and you probably would agree, the upside down aspect is pretty non-traditional because your lawyer would say, give me the retainer and I'll file for divorce. And so we, as part of our mediation and coaching process, have a comprehensive educational supports that the clients are all given. And so when they hire us, we tell them, hey, you need to not schedule your first session right away. It should be 2 weeks or so from now. And in those next 2 weeks, we want you jumping around in the educational materials and going through the questionnaire that we give you so that you can start to gather your thoughts. And the educational materials will give them tools to understand what equitable distribution even means and what those factors are, how to go about figuring out if alimony is appropriate or not. So it really is a little like Divorce 101 primer. And we have found that couples who do that really are able to apply those ideas to their own situations and work together really well to make sure they're not missing anything. And our questionnaire also, like, we have them talk through things that wouldn't be covered in the courthouse anyway, such as like college, like once the kids are over 18 and what happens. We really prompt them to make sure that they're not forgetting anything.
That's so important because especially if they're not working with attorneys, making sure that they are having a conversation about all of the issues. And there so many times I hear about people who have gone to mediation or otherwise reached an agreement and they didn't talk about a certain thing that's going to come up in 5 years. But they're talking about their kids who are very young, but they're not talking about, well, what does high school look like? And what do we do about the kid's car? And
I tell clients all the time, like, hey, some of this is just like a parenting plan we're going to create for you guys. Like, are you guys going to want to pay their bills till they're 23? Because that's a parenting decision. And it also impacts alimony. So you guys have to decide, like, it makes me laugh. Well, also, it's just another example of how antiquated our system is, because at least for our clients, it's crazy to them to say, like, cutting their kids off at 18. They have to have that conversation about what comes next. And the court will not support them in doing that, at least not around here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we wrap up, what advice would you give someone listening who is feeling overwhelmed, they may be scared, or just unsure how to start a healthier divorce process?
I think the number one thing is to not panic, right? Like, they go into, because divorce touches everything. You want to just tell yourself, we're going to do this one step at a time. Even if you have attorneys, you could tell them, I need to do this one step at a time, because it is too overwhelming. And as we were talking about that conversation with safety, to recognize for yourself that you need to feel safe and secure to be able to even think calmly about the big picture. So really focus on small, discrete steps. Start with like maintaining and figuring out your budgets in your house, because then once you feel safe, like, okay, we're not closing bank accounts, nobody's moving any money right now, we can then let that status quo sort of ride and think through the bigger questions much more calmly.
Absolutely. Again, it's taking out some of the uncertainty, right? Because having a temporary plan until you have thought about what the next step is going to look like.
That is literally right. And once that temporary plan can run background and free up mental and emotional space to think about the bigger issues. And then with our clients, we literally plan out the trigger dates. We say, okay, well, the house is going to move out on February 1st. And February 1st is when the first mortgage payment will come out of this bank account. Right. And so they really have it all planned out. They have that open communication, so they know they're all on the same page. There's no mystery about it.
And it makes it so much more feasible when they're making the decisions as to what those trigger dates are, and that everybody's on the same page with what that looks like.
Exactly. Yeah. And that, if we plan it out far enough in advance, then you can really work with kids as well to get them used to the idea and baby step them into it. So it's all part of keeping the fear out of the process and the overwhelm.
Regina, thank you so much for joining us today, and all of the incredible work that you're doing to transform how families move through the divorce process. Your story, your mission, and the compassion all remind us that divorce doesn't have to be a battlefield. And for anyone who wants to learn more about you and family transitions, where can they find your services?
Yeah, my website is ftdivorcecoaching.com for family transitions. And you can schedule a consult right through there. You can read all about our story and my mission. And I think that's probably the easiest way to find me. I'm also on YouTube at 21st Century Family Transitions. There's a YouTube channel as well with a lot more in-depth conversation about why this all works and how we put it all together.
Perfect. We'll be sure to link both of those in the show notes so it can be easily found.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you found today's episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with someone who might benefit. Until next time. Thanks for listening to the Drama-Free Divorce Podcast. If you found today's episode helpful, be sure to follow, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. For more resources or to work with us, visit jacobsonfamilylaw.com. Until next time, stay grounded, stay informed, and stay drama-free.